Thank you, Angel. So as I was saying, this meeting is called to order today at 6:33 p.m. Tonight, we are joined by Angel Muscane, our staff liaison to our committee. I want to thank all the committee members for being here tonight. I know this is our second land use meeting of June, and we will still have another one in July. So I appreciate all of the time and effort. I know there's a lot on our plates, but we are finishing up the year, so we're trying to get as much done as possible. So I do appreciate the time that you're giving us tonight. So in order to conduct an efficient meeting, let's observe a few ground rules. No one may speak until granted the floor. CB11 members, if you have a question about board business or wish to make a motion, please raise your hand through Zoom. If you click on the participants icon, the participants panel should appear and you should find the raise your hand function there. If you're still having technical difficulty, you may click on the chat icon and relay your difficulty to the staff. The chat function should not be used for CB11 business or questions about the agenda topics. I'm sorry. All such remarks should be made on the record by raising your hand through Zoom. Chat should only be used to alert us of any technical difficulties you are having, or to state in writing information like an email address that was already stated aloud on the record during the meeting. When a member is given a floor to speak, I will identify you and you can unmute yourself so that you may speak. Please keep your questions and comments succinct and germane to the discussion. Members of the public, if you have a question or a comment about the subjects on the agenda, please raise your hand through Zoom and wait to be recognized. We will now take attendance by roll call. Board members, you may unmute yourself and answer present when your name is called.
Jessica Elliott.
Present.
Elsie Encarnacion. Ivy Hume.
Present.
Francis Mastroda.
Present.
Jessica Morris.
Here.
Andrew Padilla. Vinny Torres. Jason Villanueva.
Present.
Candy Vives Vasquez. You have quorum.
Thank you very much. The agenda for tonight's meeting was distributed ahead of time by the board office and was posted online. If there's no objection, we will adopt the agenda as stated. Committee members, only if you object to the agenda, adopting of the agenda, you may raise your hand through Zoom. And seeing no objections, we are.
Also, you could, sorry.
Yes.
On the next point, you could disregard the minutes thing. That's
Right.
what I'm meeting. My bad.
Yeah, no problem. Not a problem. So now we are going into, yes, announcements. Angel, if you'd please.
Sure. So the next meeting of the Land Use, Landmarks, and Planning Committee is scheduled for July 7th at 6:30. The agenda will include votes by the committee on the Department of City Planning's proposed citywide hotels, Fresh 2, health and fitness zoning text amendments, a comprehensive update, project update on the East 125th Street development project will also be provided by EDC and HPD. That's all.
Okay, thanks. And we'll be hearing about those today during our meeting today. I would have no informational updates. Angel, is there anything you want to add or anyone else from the committee has?
No, that's all.
We can move on to our presentations and discussions. We will be having a public hearing on the zoning text amendments proposed by the Department of City Planning, which include, well, actually citywide hotels may not present today, correct? Is that right, Jose?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we're happy to answer questions on that. I mean, we can save it perhaps for the end and do like the presentations starting with Fresh, and then I believe we have BCs and open restaurants. And if there are any questions or follow-up items for the hotel special permits, I'm happy to take those questions and see what I can answer, or if not, come back to the meeting later.
Okay, perfect. So you may begin on your presentations for Fresh 2.
Great. Well, first, thank you everyone, for making the time, as Angela has mentioned and Elsie has mentioned. I know like we're super busy here trying to meet these deadlines for the citywide tax amendments, and I appreciate your commitment to the actual work that you guys are doing. So thank you very much for being open and helpful. I have joined by my my colleagues from the Department of City Planning, as well from the Department of Transportation. We're going to start with Fresh. Annie, if you're ready, you feel free to share your screen.
Thank you, Jose. I'll get the screen share up now. No. Is everyone seeing the presentation mode here?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. Good evening, all. My name's Annie White. I'm the team leader for the Upper Manhattan team at Department of City Planning, and I'll be here today presenting on the update to the Fresh program, what we're calling Fresh 2. So Fresh stands for the Food Retail Expansion to Support Health. The purpose of the Fresh zoning text, which does exist today, is to encourage more supermarkets in underserved areas of the city and to increase accessibility to fresh food. So kind of Fresh as an overall program does have two primary components. And you can see how those are mapped on the map that you're seeing here on the slide with the gray area and the green area. So part of that is a discretionary tax incentive program, and that's managed by EDC. And that provides tax breaks for supermarket operations and developers in a variety of forms, including taxes of various kinds. And you can see where that applies in the gray area on the map. And then there's the additional of zoning incentives, which is the subject of our discussion today. And there's a large overlap of those two programs, which you can see in the dark green on the map. So for a little bit of background, of course, this program is especially critical right now. Is grocery stores are fundamental to the success of neighborhoods, especially during what we saw in the COVID pandemic, where the adjacency to fresh food and supermarkets was so critical. So kind of how we got to where we are today. Back in 2018, the Department of City Planning released our Going to Market study, and this highlighted the widespread shortage of neighborhood grocery stores and limited food options in many communities across our city. Then in 2009, the original Fresh program was created to encourage, through zoning and the tax incentives, more construction of supermarkets in certain areas. Then almost a decade later, in 2018, the city held a hearing to assess the program and heard from the public, but also developers of Fresh, the concerns and feedback of how that program was implemented over the course of the 9 to 10 years. So then, between 2018 and now, there was, further analysis of the program and how we could potentially update that program to better support both the communities and the supermarkets. So the zoning resolution itself that does outline Fresh has a certification and authorization to receive to be a Fresh supermarket. So what that includes is a incentive that additional residential FAR or floor area is permitted for every square foot of a certified Fresh supermarket store. That's up to 20,000 square feet. You can also achieve a 15-foot additional height accommodation to permit the supermarket store, and that's through an authorization, not a certification. So that does have a discretionary component where the commission has to determine that the height doesn't have undue effects on the surrounding area. There's also allowances for M1 districts, which we don't have too many of in Upper Manhattan, but a Fresh store can't take the bonus residential FAR and an M1, of course, but it can build as of right up to 30,000 square feet. Otherwise, an as of right food store in an M1 is only 10,000 square feet. And then there's also additional parking reductions for Fresh supermarkets. So after that, hearing in 2018, the Department of City Planning kind of reviewed the landscape and updated what we call our SNI, the Supermarkets Need Index. which is an index that evaluates multiple factors such as the population's walking distance to a supermarket, their car ownership, a percent of families below the poverty line, and some other factors to come up with this calculating index that you can see here in the map that ranges from the white areas to the dark gray areas as low, moderate, and high need of additional supermarkets. So we determined that, the fresh was needed in areas to encourage the development and accessibility of the stores, to provide more affordable options for the residents due to, increased competition, and empower consumers with more options than they're currently having in their neighborhoods. So after this extensive analysis, Department of City Planning has proposed an update to the Fresh program, what we're calling Fresh 2, and it has the following updates that are listed here on the slide. And now I'll go through those individually in more detail. So the first is a kind of geographic expansion of the Fresh program. There's currently 19 community districts that already exist, and then 11 more will be added. You can see the proposed expansion areas in the dashed blue lines on the map on the right. There are no expansion areas in Manhattan, I will note that. And it's important to note also that Fresh is only applicable where there is commercial zoning permitted, as well as M1 districts. So if you're seeing why Fresh might not apply in some areas, it could be due to that when you start looking at the more detailed map. Another update is what we're calling the saturation provisions to prevent oversaturation of fresh markets. So since 2009, when the program was first put into the zoning, there have been 28 fresh supermarkets certified. Currently, just due to development timelines, 8 projects are occupied and open to the public. But out of those 28 projects, we were starting to see clustering in certain neighborhoods of the fresh markets, particularly you might notice in the neighborhoods of Bed-Stuy, where there were 15 to 17 projects certified. And this started to concern us in the community in some ways, that an oversaturation of fresh markets would both cause undue competition to themselves, but also to hurt the existing supermarkets that are already in the neighborhood and actually have a negative consequence. So in addition, they do receive, an increase in floor area and potentially height. And we wanted to ensure that there wasn't a wide scale undoing of the zoning that was in place due to the increased building size. So the proposal to kind of counter balance this is to limit the FAR of fresh area at 40,000 square feet within a half-mile distance. So just to note that currently the maximum FAR that one fresh project can have is what we're calling the the bonusable area, what they can receive in residential floor area is 20,000 square feet. So we understand that this provision can't completely stop or discourage supermarkets from locating in a neighborhood. Supermarkets can still locate within commercial areas without going through a fresh certification. They, of course, then wouldn't receive the incentives. But we do think this is important to make sure that we don't have kind of any undue negative consequences for an over clustering of fresh markets in one area. And to zoom in on CB11 for a minute, so there are currently 2 certified projects in CB11. It's 2211 3rd Avenue and 1516 Park Avenue. So, we recognize we aren't currently seeing an oversaturation in East Harlem in Community District 11, but we still think that this text was important to apply more broadly, as we could see the same clustering that we're seeing in Bed-Stuy and other areas, and to avoid any unintended negative consequences of such. And there are some additional kind of more minor updates, but I will go through them. So one is changes to window and transparency requirements. So currently the provisions require that 50% of the ground floor area to be transparent for kind of urban design and openness qualities. But we heard that it is very difficult and costly to do that for conversion projects. So currently, so the proposal would allow that conversions and renovations can waive out of that glazing requirement that would still apply for new construction buildings. There's also an update to the parking regulations, and this isn't as applicable in Manhattan, but the proposal is to reduce parking requirements in some of the lower density residential districts to ensure parking regulations do not stop a needed grocery project. So the update will allow up to 10,000 square feet of fresh area to be waived from parking calculations. And then there's some other, kind of more miscellaneous zoning text clarifications and modifications. So at least 6,000 square feet of the grocery store must be contiguous and located on the same floor, and that's just for better programmatic use but also accessibility. We also redefined the distribution of products in the fresh grocery store that was previously required to be 80% of food products, and it's now going to be 60%. We heard that this is just more feasible for the reasonable operations of most grocery stores while still ensuring that it is a store that is providing the fresh food and produce that we want to see in the neighborhoods. And then finally, that the fresh project is, the proposal is saying that it will not, that it will allow projects that aren't receiving that bonus of residential floor area to be exempted from the restrictive declaration legal requirement. So now I'll just give an overview of this project timeline. It was certified in May. We are now in the ULURP referral period at the community boards. We are in Manhattan. We're going to all boards in which the fresh applies, which is 9, 10, 11, 12. And I will note that the community board clock then after its 60-day referral ends on July 27th. And finally, there are many other additional resources that you can have these links to, as I know we shared this deck, so hopefully that can circulate. But there's additional maps and information on the city planning website. And then if you're also curious about the other tax incentives, there's more information on EDC's website. And that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that. I'm going to take questions from the committee at this moment, and then we can take some from the attendees. Jessica Elliott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much for this, and it's an important element of health equity for our neighborhood. I did want to bring up, you mentioned potential oversaturation. When I was looking at your map on page 7, I thought that perhaps the fresh grocery store was one avenue over, but the grocery stores, at least where I'm located, the produce that they have, there's not a lot of selection in terms of what they, sorry, my cat's walking on my keyboard. What they have, and then they're usually out of stock. So I think that's a huge issue, is like not being able to get things you would need at a grocery store that's readily available in stock. And then for prices, this isn't one of these grocery stores, but one of them nearby us has a, they were selling a half gallon of milk for $8, for example, which is pretty ridiculous. So I just wanted to raise that these concerns are still happening in the neighborhood, and that we hope that they can be solved with these sort of programs. So thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. I don't see any other hands. I did have a question quickly about the conversion. I know you mentioned that they would not. Will they be waived automatically, or do they have to apply for a waiver in order to get, they'll automatically be waived if they're converting? So they won't have to have the
Yeah, I believe the text is just being amended to say that the glazing requirements only applies to new construction.
Right.
So it just wouldn't apply if you're a conversion property.
And to speak to the affordable, I mean, you guys really don't speak to affordability. It's really more about accessibility to having these options. But having the options doesn't mean that it'll be affordable options for neighborhoods like East Harlem, right?
Yeah, that's true. We don't kind of set certain standards for affordability. The idea is that when we start to see an increased number of supermarkets, there'll be, the healthy competition that would allow for more accessible and affordable produce, but nothing is regulated in the zoning on that.
Right. Okay. And Jessica Morris, I see your hand is up.
Thanks, Elsie. So I guess my sort of question is, what are you looking for from us? I mean, it's a sort of point of process to present and deliver information, but I think there's a decades-long process of trying to provide something for neighborhoods that need it, and if zoning text amendments are the tools that we have to do that. I guess it was somewhat disappointed in trying to access the information that was representing our landscape and sort of neighborhood as far as what constitutes a fresh market and what constitutes just a supermarket. I think that information, it really speaks to the vibrancy of neighborhoods that change. So calling something a fresh market and allowing for incentives to happen because something is called a fresh market and allowances are given in that development process. I guess my question is how effective and how complete is the research that you're doing in the changing landscape of the neighborhoods, to the point that my colleague Jessica brought to the table about the price of a half gallon of milk and the quality of vegetables that can be accessed at these points of provision that take a decade. A child is grown at that point, so I think the pace of service provision, I understand zoning text amendments take time, but I'm wondering if this is the best mechanism to deliver this point of health equity and opportunity to neighborhoods that need it. My other question is this transparency question and design guidelines for something like a supermarket. It's actually a sort of a vital place where people congregate when it's done right. And when it's plastered with signage and you see there are transparent windows, but you can't actually see through them because of what the culture of display is, I think there's all sorts of challenges to the sort of operational side of meeting these requirements in neighborhoods that are, aesthetics are not the first point of perspective, but they have a function. So I think that frame of requiring, active frontage as part of a place where people congregate, if that's not an aspect of the zoning text amendment, perhaps it should be, because I think there's a lot of opportunity when you do have these special places that you're incentivizing, but I'm not sure that just giving additional FAR makes for a good community asset at the ground floor. So it's a provocation and not a specific question, other than, are there beyond 50% transparency in the facade any other requirements for the street wall or design guidelines at the ground floor?
I can confirm that. I do believe that the transparency was kind of the major kind of urban design requirement as the, where fresh supermarkets locate take many forms, and I think there was also a hesitancy to be too over prescriptive of what form that would take. I appreciate your questions, provocations. I think there's a few things that a lot of it is, I think, more for the board to kind of determine if they support this project, but we can get you further information on what constitutes a fresh market versus other grocery stores. There's certain interior requirements, such as how the layout works, the contiguity of space, the percentage of the space that should be dedicated to actual fresh food products. There's certain, height, ceiling height requirements so that the space feels welcoming and well lit and not like a cramped underground space. And you also bring up a really good point about, it does take a long time from when, relatively long from when zoning is put in place to when we're seeing these projects. We do, have the 8 fresh markets operating. And I have heard from our team that has been doing this research that we haven't heard specific complaints about those stores of being overpriced for the neighborhood, versus anything else. And I think you're right that zoning is only one tool. That's why, there are the tax incentives as well. But I think the city, there's a lot to support healthy communities beyond just, this is zoning, but we know that this is an important incentive to getting developers and property owners to locate supermarkets in the ground floor, as there could be other higher and best uses for neighborhoods, but this is really critical. And I think the fact that we have seen 28 projects get certified that are, in the pipeline is a testament to that developers are interested in this.
And then just a follow-up question, is it possible for an existing market to certify as a fresh market and transfer its incentives?
I'm sorry, can you clarify transfer incentives?
I'm not sure that I can, but is it possible for them to sort of, it's essentially a sort of transfer of development rights question.
Okay.
Are they able to certify independently of a development site in the area or a vicinity and exchange, that amenity for FAR next door?
Sure. That's a good question. I can confirm this. My understanding would be if you have an existing building that was a supermarket, that supermarket could then certify as a fresh as long as they are bringing up into compliance all of the requirements. And then as long as they're within the same zoning lot, the same zoning regulations of transfer development rights would still apply. So if there was a larger zoning lot that, there was only a fresh market in one portion, that whole zoning lot is what, the FAR would apply to, but it wouldn't be, it's not a percentage increase. So there's not the risk that there would be, 20% increased floor area in a much larger lot. It really is more of a 1-to-1, so that, FAR per square footage would be the same as if it was the individual tax lot versus a larger zoning lot.
Great. And then last question, and I'm sorry to take time, is existing supermarkets. Sometimes they're 1.5 stories. Sometimes they're way underbuilt. If they all go away to get developed over a period of time, we're losing an asset in order to, maybe gain something down the road, which could cause sort of food deserts periodically in places. Is there, any way to kind of measure that or prevent, losing what we have in a way that could be sort of, a sort of domino, or it could happen just like a perfect storm? I mean, I think about where I am, and I think about the low-lying markets, and I think about how vital they are to, people shopping, and I think about how ripe they are for development because of our rezoning situation and where we're at in things. So if all those markets go away in a 5-year period and it takes, 3 years to develop, then where's everybody getting their food? Is there protections or provisions for that short-term type of potential impacts?
There currently isn't any kind of protections for keeping the existing. I think the hope is that through these very attractive incentives, that if a 1 or 1.5 story grocery store site was to be redeveloped, then that developer has incentive to actually replace it and put the grocery store on the ground floor. But to answer your question, simply no, there's not a protection.
Thank you. Carly, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for the presentation. I have a couple questions / comments. The first is, you mentioned the impact of clustering on supermarkets that aren't fresh supermarkets. And I was wondering whether those supermarkets are also included in the clustering analysis, or the analysis you do to determine whether, whether there's an oversaturation of grocery markets. And that's my first question.
Sure. A little bit yes and no. I think the ending result of how we have chosen to monitor clustering, we determined that we really can only look at what are fresh markets, as we aren't delving into the monitoring of how supermarkets are locating as of right throughout commercial areas throughout the city. But when we were, when our housing and economic development kind of data experts were determining what the appropriate clustering saturation is, they did look at things such as, like the whole index of neighborhood demographics and current access to walkability to supermarkets. So when they looked at a neighborhood, I'm just keep using Bed-Stuy because that is the example where we've seen the most. We're looking at how we can ensure the clustering of fresh specifically, but they're doing a neighborhood index that does take into account anything that we're qualifying as supermarkets across the city.
Okay, thank you. And I guess that brings me to, it's more of a comment. It's not so much of a question, but I guess the question is whether or not you have considered this. So I guess I'm a little surprised that DCP is considering expanding this program, the FRESH program, just because there has been a lot of research that has kind of questioned the underlying premise of food deserts. Research that shows that subsidizing the expansion of supermarkets, it doesn't really do much to change what people eat. And that's not really so much of what the issue is. It's more about food choices, and not just about food choices, but also affordability. So one, I guess the question in response to that is that something DCP considered? Just this emerging research that shows that food deserts are not really, the most accurate way to determine, food insecurity, and then two, understanding that zoning can only do so much. I know that you had just touched on that. I know Jessica mentioned that. I guess it's not so much of a question, but I would challenge DCP to think about how can we then incentivize affordability, because that's way more of a factor that determines food insecurity than like access and proximity to a supermarket. And that's all.
Thank you, Carly. Seeing no other hands on this topic, we will move on to the next presentation. Thank you, Annie, for presenting that. I'm not sure if you're presenting the other one as well, but no, okay. And we will be voting on this in July. So we'll get you any other questions that come up.
Yeah, the next presentation will be the Health and Fitness Citywide Text Amendment. And here with me is Andrew Cantu to present that. So please feel free to share your screen, Andy.
Hey everybody, thanks for having me. My name is Andy Cantu. I am a planner with Manhattan office, And I'm going to try to share my screen. Does everybody see this?
Yes.
Is that a yes?
Yep.
Okay, great. So thanks for having me again. So I'm here to present our proposal, the city's proposal, for a text amendment to allow health and fitness facilities in more areas of the city as of right. And the purpose of this text amendment is really just to provide health-related amenities to more communities and hopefully cut some red tape for small businesses, especially during this really critical post-pandemic economic recovery period. So as most of you know, in order to operate a gym or a licensed massage therapy studio or a spa and a range of other sort of health and fitness related facilities in New York City, one has to first obtain a special permit from the Board of Standards and Appeals, or the BSA. And all of these uses sort of fall within the umbrella term of physical culture or health establishments, or PCEs. So I'll be using that term a lot throughout the presentation. There are a few limited areas of the city, mostly special districts like East Harlem, where you can open a PCE without first obtaining a special permit. But in most cases, a special permit is required. And even if businesses wanted to apply for a special permit, they aren't allowed along many local commercial streets, including areas where we allow other local retail and service uses, like in C1 commercial overlays. And I know there's a lot of C14 and C15 commercial overlays mapped in CB11. So these health and fitness related facilities take a lot of different forms. What's going to be impacted is, things we're really familiar with, like those larger commercial gyms like Blink and Planet Fitness and New York sports clubs, all the way down to your sort of more local mom and pop storefront gyms. They also include studios like martial arts, yoga, aerobics, Pilates, cycling studios, things like that. But also down to sort of like therapeutic and wellness businesses like spas and licensed massage therapy and things like that. So, how did these rules come about in the first place, and why are PCEs regulated differently from almost every other local retail and service use in the city? So during the 1970s, in response to community concerns about commercial sex within, quote unquote, massage parlors or health clubs, the special permit was created that requires most health and fitness related businesses to first undergo a really strenuous criminal background check from the Department of Investigations before receiving approval to operate. At the time this was created, New York really didn't have the wide range of commercial gyms and other fitness facilities that we're all now really familiar with. Gyms were sort of this sort of niche activity, whereas now they're ubiquitous and millions of us go to gyms and spas on a regular basis. There were some large nonprofit health clubs like the Y that offered exercise classes, but it was never really anticipated that thousands of overwhelmingly legitimate businesses would need to get special permission to operate. Obviously, things have changed a lot over the past 4+ decades since the special permit was created. For one, there's been significant growth in the health and fitness industry and the desire for communities to access these amenities. And we found that these businesses are overwhelmingly very legitimate and valued in the communities that they serve. And second, regulations around massage therapy have changed a lot. Massage therapists are now licensed health professionals by the New York State Education Department, and a registry of all licensed massage therapists is publicly available online. But like I mentioned, these businesses continue to be very uniquely regulated through zoning, which really places significant burdens on small businesses. The special permit typically takes, at least 6 months to be granted, sometimes up to 9 months or a year, and often costs, between $30,000 and $50,000 in fees to architects and attorneys and the BSA. Also, the special permit, like I mentioned, isn't applicable in a lot of C1 districts, meaning that gyms and spas are not allowed in locations where we allow other retail and commercial uses like restaurants and laundromats and grocery stores that we use every single day. And finally, at a time when vacancy rates are really high along some retail streets, we really want to ensure that our zoning regulations allow for a diversity of businesses to occupy storefronts, which in turn helps activate corridors and makes them safer and more vibrant. This proposal is also consistent with recommendations from major strategic plans that the city's developed over the past several years, including One NYC and the Small Business First reports, both from 2015. And over the past decade or so, the special permit requirements have been largely removed as part of neighborhood-wide rezonings. And this proposal is just expanding this policy citywide. So in the East Harlem corridor neighborhood-wide rezoning, for example, I believe that all C2 districts and higher, as well as manufacturing districts, are allowed to open PCEs as of right without a special permit. And as we've seen, businesses in the health and fitness sector have really been impacted by the pandemic. A lot of them reducing staff or closing either temporarily or permanently. And we found that between 2019 and 2020, employment in this sector dropped by more than 60%. It's recovered a little bit, but really still a struggling sector in the economy. So as the industry continues to recover, we want to make sure that zoning doesn't pose this excessive barrier that prevents businesses from being able to meet that growing demand. So what exactly are we proposing? DCP is proposing to remove the BSA special permit entirely. So that portion of the zoning is going to go away. Gyms and spas would be considered commercial uses that we would be allowed as of right. Excuse me. Smaller gyms and spas, meaning those that are less than 10,000 square feet in floor area, would be classified in the zoning resolution as a use group 6 use and allowed in all commercial and manufacturing districts, including those C1 districts where gyms are currently not allowed under any circumstances. Gyms and spas over 10,000 square feet would be classified as a use group 9 use and would be slightly more limited in geography. So they would be allowed in C2 commercial districts and higher and all manufacturing districts. And they'd also be allowed in the highest density C1 districts, C18 and C19, and all C1 overlays mapped within high density R9 and R10 districts. And this distinction between uses smaller than 10,000 square feet and uses larger than 10,000 square feet is consistent with the way a lot of other commercial uses are treated within zoning, like the difference between a small boutique and a department store. When it comes to massage therapy, licensed massage therapy is going to be treated in the same way that other sort of outpatient medical uses in zoning, and it'll be categorized as either a use group 4 ambulatory healthcare use, which is a community facility use, or a use group 6 healthcare office, which is a commercial use. So treated under the zoning as like a doctor's office or something similar to that. And this will allow licensed massage therapy studios in most residence districts, as well as commercial and manufacturing districts. And just to be clear, because I've gotten this question a lot, massage is illegal to practice without a license and will be under this proposal. And unlicensed massage will continue to be disallowed anywhere in the city according to the proposed zoning. Although we've heard a lot of positive feedback from communities across the city, sometimes when reviewing BSA applications, it does raise the issue of possible nuisances such as noise and vibration from gyms, and the BSA occasionally does impose conditions on the permits that it issues. So to continue to address those concerns, this proposal will also include additional performance standards for noise and vibration. And performance standards are a very common mechanism that are used primarily in manufacturing districts to make sure that things like noise and vibration and fumes and radiation and things like that are kept under a maximum threshold. So a subset of higher impact gyms, facilities where there's like a lot of weights dropping, a lot of amplified sound, lots of machines going at the same time. They'll need to have an acoustical engineer certify with the Department of Buildings that the facility is designed to meet those performance standards before they can be issued a final certificate of occupancy. And these provisions will apply to mixed-use buildings in all commercial and mixed-use districts. Lower impact facilities like yoga or floor Pilates and therapeutic services, they won't need to demonstrate compliance with those noise and vibration performance standards. But everything, as in, under our current regime, will still be subject to the New York City Noise Code. So how will this is not the correct presentation. Sorry, let me open the Community Board 11 presentation, where you can actually see the maps that are relevant to you. Sorry, let me share this again. All right, is that better? Could everyone see that map?
Yes.
Okay, great. So on this map, which is really just looking at gyms and spas under 10,000 square feet, the areas in blue are areas where gyms are currently allowed as of right. So those are the East Harlem Corridor Special District. Areas in orange, or that peachy color, are districts where a BSA special permit is currently required, and where under this proposal, gyms and spas under 10,000 square feet are going to be allowed as of right. And in purple, you have districts where gyms and spas are currently not allowed under any circumstances. They can't even apply for the special permit, and they will be allowed as of right there as well. So really anything in blue, orange, or purple is where these facilities are going to be allowed as of right in the future. Those, I should clarify, gyms and spas under 10,000 square feet are going to be allowed as of right under this proposal. And on this map, we're looking at gyms and spas over 10,000 square feet and where they will be allowed as of right. And really the only difference between this map and the previous map is that gyms and spas over 10,000 square feet, they're not going to be allowed in those C1 commercial overlays that are mapped within the R6, R7, R8 residential districts that are really prevalent across CB11. And on this map, we're looking at areas where licensed massage therapy studios will be allowed as of right, which, as you can see, is pretty much everywhere. Again, licensed massage therapy is going to be regulated in the same way as a community facility use, like a outpatient medical facility or a doctor's office. A use that's already very prevalent in residence districts today. So in terms of timeline, this application was certified on May 19th, and the community board has until July 27th to submit your recommendation. We're tentatively scheduled right now for a public hearing in late summer and a likely vote at the City Planning Commission in September. So that's where we are today. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Andy. Opening up to committee members. Ivy, I see your hand up.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you for the presentation. It's always been mind-boggling to me how difficult it is to find a gym in this area. I have to walk 20 minutes to get to mine on 116th and FDR Drive, Planet Fitness over there. But I guess one question I have just looking at this map is why isn't more area available for gyms? And I guess I'm just shocked that the reason was a zoning reason. That's why there are no gyms in this neighborhood. But it also seems that there's a lot of white remaining here, and particularly on all the streets, it seems that all of the gym available storefront locations are located on avenues with the exception of 110th and 116th in the major thoroughfares. So if you could just speak a little bit about why this isn't more ambitious.
Yeah, that's definitely a fair assessment. CB11 and a lot of the upper Manhattan community districts, there is a lot of white area compared to other areas of Manhattan, especially downtown and midtown. And that's really because a lot of the areas you're seeing in white that aren't shaded are just straight up residential districts. They're not commercial, they're not commercial overlays mapped there. And because of that, there are really no commercial uses allowed in them. That's the long and short of it, is they're mostly just residence districts.
I guess I'm just wondering, then why wouldn't this resolution be the appropriate place to question that? Or why are we stopping at avenues and not going farther with this?
Right. So, under this proposal, it's really not seeking any sort of map amendment. So we're not seeking to, remap residential areas to C districts. It's really just acknowledging that those areas that are already zoned for local retail and commercial uses, those areas are definitely appropriate for gyms and spas and other uses like that. And under the current zoning, our districts, it's assumed that intensive commercial uses like local retail, grocery stores, laundromats, bodegas, things like that are not appropriate in our districts. And that's just a way that the zoning has evolved over the years. But I do agree with you that maybe in the future it might it might behoove us to take a look at these and look at fresh eyes, these corridors, especially the avenues that are strictly residential, and maybe it might make sense to allow a wider range of uses there. But this is not that opportunity.
I guess I just also want to point out finally that there are large swaths of avenues that are still white too, like Park Avenue between like 98th and 110th. We can't have any gyms. If we go over to, what is this, Lexington 3rd? I think it's 2nd Avenue between 97th and 100th Street. I guess I'm still wondering why there's so much left untouched, and maybe I'm only asking as someone who's lived here for like 10 years, wondering why there's no gym within walking distance. And I don't know if other people on the board feel that way, but I certainly have struggled with that myself, especially in COVID.
I can volunteer a reason for that is that most of those places that you're talking about are large tower in the park housing developments, which when they were in 1961, they were zoned as entirely residential. And during all of the rezonings, except in 2017, when the period where the part between 112th and 115th were rezoned with commercial overlays. They were left out without any commercial overlays for the most part. And it's essentially a relic from those times. And when there are rezonings, there have been commercial overlays mapped over those developments in anticipation of potential commercial uses there.
I guess I would just say, why aren't we doing that with this conversation? It just seems that, you know, we're getting a little bit more, but we're still leaving a lot sort of uninterrogated, and it just seems that there should be like a little more of a critical approach to. We just listened to a presentation on fresh markets and vegetables, and yet we don't have anywhere to exercise here. And this is a real problem, I think, for the neighborhood that we are addressing in part with this. But if we can start to anticipate more productive, healthy uses for potential, you know, tower in the park locations later on, and there have been all sorts of conversations on the side with trying to improve, you know, the finances of NYCHA. And it seems that one way to do that and I'm not like proposing anything, I just understand that there are talks about bringing things in like charter schools in the bottom of these buildings, or, you know, maybe a gym wouldn't be a bad idea. It's just, why can't we have a more holistic approach to health in our city rather than thinking about things and kind of coming up shorter than, in my opinion, we could.
Thank you for that.
That's a point well taken. And to just jump off of George's comment, which is really insightful. Again, a lot of these areas, especially along the avenues that were, you know, in large part of urban renewal plans in the 60s and 70s, in many cases, there literally are not buildings along their periphery. Or there's like very large setbacks. So in those cases, you know, even if it were rezoned to allow commercial uses, it may not even literally be physically possible for them to locate there. Another condition that I can think of, especially closer to the park, Fifth Park, Madison, you know, it's really more prevalent to see your sort of larger scale apartment buildings where it's really not common to have the only sort of commercial adjacent uses you would tend to see, because these spaces are so small, are things like doctors' offices, you know, where you have, you know, dentists and doctors occupying maisonettes within large apartment buildings, or on, you know, garden level apartments within brownstones and things like that. So it really has more to do with sort of the urban form of these areas, and less to do with sort of like the practical implications of, oh, we didn't consider these areas for, you know, commercial development.
Thank you. George, I did see your hand up before. Did you put it down?
You need to lower it.
Okay, now it's back up. George and then Jessica.
So I'm going to ask a leading question here. Well, first of all, let me say that people have been talking about this for a long time, and it's something that I think many people are very happy to see. But here's my leading question is that, so imagine you have a massage studio where illegal things are happening, such as, you know, the reasons we have these rules in the first place. Is it possible then to use zoning administratively and get the Department of Buildings to go in and shut down an establishment because it's not a permitted use?
So that's a really good question, and it's not a leading question at all. We get that directly a lot. So two things. So within the zoning resolution, as part of this proposal, non-licensed massage therapy will continue to be explicitly disallowed. So there is a civil remedy under the proposal should, you know, an unlicensed massage therapy studio open and operate. Also, you know, commercial sex, prostitution will continue to be illegal. And, you know, there's a criminal remedy there as well in the event that there's, you know, prostitution or commercial sex or, you know, things like that going on. So, you know, I think your question is related to, you know, okay, we're removing some barriers. Does that make it easier for bad actors to act? And I would say that, you know, even under the current regime, you know, if someone decides that they want to flout the law and open up a, you know, massage parlor, zoning is not going to stop them.
Well, actually, my point was that it's theoretically possible to shut down the establishment and send the workers home administratively as opposed to criminally. If it is a violation of zoning, you could civilly solve the problem as opposed to criminally, which to me actually seems much more attractive. So that was my point.
Okay, yeah, and yeah, so there, under this proposal, there will still be both a criminal and civil remedy for prostitution, human trafficking, things like that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Elsie. I think I took my hand down, but I guess the opportunity to sort of point to the presentation we just had, point to this presentation here about uses, and I think residential neighborhoods are, you know, changed, and I think the past year that these text amendments were in the pipeline long before COVID hit. That's just the pace of government, and zoning text changes take time. But recognizing some of the points of challenge that, you know, our little corner of Manhattan have brought to the table, I think, you know, assessing that use value and the sort of restrictive requirements of zoning in ways that maybe no longer serve you know, how people live in places, not to mention the sort of the legacies that are being reinforced by the inability to change the white areas per se. With regard to Ivy's point, I think it's a challenge to all of you at DCP to recognize what you're pushing through the pipeline and actively you know, try to find creative ways to challenge pushing those boundaries in the process, because by the time it gets to us, it's pretty fully cooked. My other point is just in response to Ivy, I think East Harlem has maybe a different kind of culture of exercise that should be celebrated, that happens outdoors in public in a way that a gym, you know, could not contain. Thinking about, you know, what happens at Marcus Garvey, what happens by the footbridge over to Randall's Island, things like that. So I think as much as we would like to see health being a cultural aspect of storefronts and ground floor uses, I think a more public open space to actively recreate and engage is also something that you know, connects to cultures of health. So it's a non-specific challenge as you do your work and bring it to us to cool down.
Jessica, I wholeheartedly agree with you, and I go running in Thomas Jefferson Park all the time and Central Park, and really all over outside. And I agree that that needs to be celebrated, but it's not a substitute for having gyms that allow for indoor exercise, particularly in the winter months.
Those are both points well taken. At city planning, we try our hardest to be, proactive planners rather than reactive planners, and respond to, conditions that we might anticipate in the future rather than react to, the changing market. But that being said, we do have to contend with, bandwidth issues. As you know very well, there are a lot of citywide text amendments and a lot of private applications that are coming across your desk these days. I will say though, if CB11 decided that you wanted to take a fresh look at these corridors, and that you may agree as a community that maybe these areas, these corridors deserve an expanded range of uses, we would, be happy to explore that with you and have that conversation.
Andy, we have a question from Beverly Pabon and then from Jason Villanueva.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak. Thank you for the presentation also. It's so funny, a couple of months, if not last year in the summertime, I'm driving down 3rd Avenue and 117th and 3rd Avenue, I see a sign that said Peep Show right on the corner of 117th and 7th and 3rd Avenue. And I can tell you, it just freaked me out to see a Peep Show sign there. I called the community board and asked about it. I was so glad that they got back to me to tell me that that was a sign for a movie that was being done in that area. I guess my point is that with this type of change in the text, and I know you're trying to do it for citywide, I'm afraid of even licensed establishments being used illegally in the community if we change the text as it is now. I have a question regarding the parks area. I see we have a lot of park areas, and I'm not sure if this would be an option. Can small businesses do any type of program or partnership with the parks in order to have gyms and little small businesses of the type that you're proposing in those facilities? And I'll wait to listen.
Yeah, so thank you for those questions. So to your first point, when it comes to, and I don't know, I'm not aware of that specific establishment, but I will tell you that things like strip clubs, adult movie theaters, those things are regulated completely differently under zoning that PCEs and health and fitness related facilities are. So this proposal that's on the table would not, change or modify or really touch those regulations at all, nor are they meant to.
Okay.
To your second point about parks, so long story short is no. That's really not under the purview of the city planning department. It's really up to parks how they program what's under their jurisdiction. I know that in the summer a lot of times parks will host like yoga in the park or things like that. So that's definitely an option that's on the table. I also know that sort of informally facilities like boot camps, like Barry's boot camps, or places where people are like picking up like tires or like weird stuff like that. Sometimes will go to parks and do their stuff there. That's not officially sanctioned under zoning, but it's not disallowed necessarily.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. I don't see any other hands up. Jason, you still have a question, or do you lower your hand? Okay. So on behalf of Elsie, who had to step away for a second, thank you very much, Andy and team. And we can move on to the next presentation.
Okay,
Thanks so
so
much.
now we have the last of the citywide text of the 5 citywide text amendment for the road to recovery for New York City. The open restaurant, which was certified yesterday. Here with me, I have representatives from DOT and as well as CCP. Just wanted to add a quick clarification. This program has the component of the roadway program, which you will hear from DOT, and it kind of revolves about the rules and what is going to be happening later on. And there's also the citywide tax amendment, which is like what DCP will be doing to actually allow for the open restaurants program to continue. And you'll hear more about that soon. Kimberly, are you able to share your screen with the team?
Yes, I believe so. Let me check. That works, right? So we're going to kick off this presentation with DOT, and I'm Kimberly Rancourt. I'm the Director of Special Projects at the Manhattan Borough Commissioner's Office for DOT. And we are joined by some colleagues. I am joined by some colleagues here from DOT as well. I will allow them to introduce themselves if they are able to speak.
Hi, this is Julie Shipper, Deputy Chief of Staff at DOT.
Judy's on as well.
This is Judy Chang, Director of Special Projects in the First Deputy Commissioner's Office.
Great, thanks. So they'll be able to help answer questions following the presentation. Just give me 1 second as I finish setting up. I've had a day filled with technical challenges today. Great, so to kick it off, thanks for having us here to share an update on the future of the Permanent Open Restaurants program. So before we get into the details, I just want to give a brief overview of our presentation and what we'll be talking about tonight. So the future permanent open restaurants program, like the temporary program, will include both sidewalk and roadway seating, and will be managed by DOT, just like the temporary program. So it will aim to balance the different uses of the streets and the sidewalk and the needs of the various users of those spaces while providing space for restaurants to operate outdoor seating. And the city will be evaluating what has worked well and what has worked not so well in the past as we develop the long-term guidelines for this project, for this program. So, as many of you know, the city had sidewalk cafes and public seating in the roadway before the pandemic, but these were fairly limited in number. The Department of Consumer Workforce Protection, which was formerly Department of Consumer Affairs, DCA, administered the sidewalk program. And DOT also ran a small pilot of public roadway seating that we called Seat Streets that had a total of 25 locations citywide, and most of those locations were in Manhattan. But in general, the prohibitive costs and complex processes associated with those programs kind of kept them to a pretty limited number throughout the city, which obviously we've seen a big change with the open restaurants program. So, as you also all know, last spring in response to the pandemic, as part of the city's recovery, we suspended existing rules through an emergency executive order to allow business to be conducted in the public right of way, which allowed for the creation of the open restaurants program. And since the launch of the program last year, over 11,000 restaurants have participated. And that includes the roadway and sidewalk seating parts of the program. And City Hall estimates that the program has helped to save about 100,000 jobs. And it has been really a lifeline for the restaurant industry during these times, but it also has brought back incredible vitality to the city's sidewalks and streets that we were really missing last March and April and May. So to many of us, it's been sort of a beacon of hope in a generally dark time, and a reminder of the city's resiliency and a sign that we can imagine a better future for our city. So as we look at the lessons that we learned over the past year, including some of the both positive and the negative lessons as well, these will help to inform our process moving forward with the development of the permanent program. So on the positive side, we think that the robust use of this program has really been due to 3 critical components or aspects of it. First, that we didn't have any specific geographies that were off limits. So unlike unlike the previous Sidewalk Cafe program prior to the pandemic, any restaurant that has ground floor frontage and sidewalk or roadway space that could meet the criteria has been able to participate. Secondly, the program has been free and very easy to use. So unlike the previous program, which involved a lot of multiple levels of review over the course of many months. And third, the inclusion of roadwalk seating, which is almost entirely new to the city. And this has provided an opportunity for many restaurants who would otherwise not be able to participate in outdoor sidewalk seating to be a part of the program. So we've also, of course, learned from the challenges due to the speed of the rollout and the emergency circumstances under which it was rolled out. There was definitely a learning curve for everyone involved. And as DOT learned more about operating the program, some of the guidance did evolve, and there were some changes which was resulting in some confusion. So we want to make sure that we have really clear guidelines and communication moving forward. And throughout the program, we've heard some safety concerns from some of our sister agencies, including FDNY, who called out some issues about turning radii and making sure safety signs are visible. And so, of course, for DOT, maintaining safety is really critical, and we'll be considering these concerns and issues really carefully as we continue to develop the program. Enforcement has been a really big challenge on both sides. So restaurants feeling like they've been kind of squeezed and over-inspected or unfairly inspected, and then communities feeling like there hasn't been enough or consistent enforcement. So certainly that's something that we need to get right moving forward. And apologies that I did not flip the slide for that. But last fall, after having such a successful summer program and seeing so much support for our restaurants and seeing so much revitalization of the city streets, the mayor charged city agencies with developing a permanent successor to the emergency program, which does require that we change some of the laws that control outdoor dining in non-emergency situations. And that includes the administrative code, which spells out the responsibility of different city agencies, and also some of the zoning, which will be focused on removing some of those geographic restrictions that I spoke about a minute ago. And so we'll be working through those details over time. And I'm going to talk through now just a bit about what we're envisioning for the long-term program, and then we'll get back to some of the processes and legal changes that will need to take place. So looking at our vision, we anticipate that, like in the emergency program, DOT will administer a permanent option for both sidewalk seating and roadway seating, and that eligible restaurants will be able to apply to use one or both of those spaces within the frontage of the restaurant. And also, same as with the emergency program, it will be open citywide to any restaurant with ground floor frontage and an active license from the Department of Health, who can, of course, meet the certain criteria that we have and the guidelines about the guidelines. So both the sidewalk and roadway cafes will be required to be removable and will be subject to clear path and other siting criteria that require individual review and must follow the rules of operation. So the exact design requirements will be figured out as we develop the design guidelines through a process and through the rulemaking steps. So in the next few slides, I'll talk through it in a little more detail, but I just want to underscore that we really think the most successful versions of the open streets, open restaurants rather, are those that activate but don't privatize the street environment and allow for street access for other uses like street work when needed. So just to reiterate, for sidewalk cafe seating, this would be open to all restaurants who can meet the criteria citywide. We envision that this part of the program would be a year-round element. We will publish specific design guidelines that will be very clear, and of course will incorporate ADA compliance. We'll have consistent hours of operation. And most importantly, the size and the scale of the cafes will be defined by the size of the sidewalk and other obstructions that are found along the sidewalk space. So just to elaborate on that point, a key part of the design guidelines will regulate the sort of interaction of those seating areas with the many other street furniture elements that are found on the sidewalk, including the rules for specific sighting distances are being sourced in part from some of the pre-existing sidewalk cafe program guidelines, and they'll of course include distance from life and safety infrastructure like standpipes and hydrants. And so just looking at the new clear path requirements, which would be updated. So we're proposing twofold requirements. So for most of the city, the old rule of 8 feet or 50% of the sidewalk width, whichever is greater, will be the standard. But in some areas of the city where we have higher foot traffic, we're proposing 12 feet or 50% to ensure that there's enough space in those areas where we really think we need that extra sidewalk space. So for example, in those locations, a 15-foot sidewalk would allow you to have a 3-foot sidewalk cafe. And for restaurants that don't meet these requirements, that are not able to do so, there'll be a waiver to go down to a 6-foot clear path. And that waiver would be reviewed by both DOT and the mayor's office for people with disabilities to ensure a high standard of accessibility in some of those tighter locations. And these requirements will be adopted into DOT's rules, and restaurants will be required to provide proof that they can meet that clear path when they're designing their sidewalk cafe. And just a quick look at this map shows kind of where the different clear path requirements will be in place throughout the city. So 8 feet is the most common throughout most of the city, but some of the 12-foot areas you can see in the central business districts and really heavily pedestrianized areas. So looking at the roadway seating option now, we're really excited about this incredible new opportunity for restaurants. And especially those where in locations of which there are many throughout the city where the sidewalks are really too narrow to accommodate cafes, and that's been a limitation in the past. So the proposal for this part of the program would be similar or very, very close to what it is now, where it will be allowed in the curb lane of the street where loading, except where loading or bus lanes or other street rules preclude. And so as with the sidewalk cafes, it's also really important that these setups be removable to allow for storage when street work needs to occur. And it's important that they remain unenclosed to allow for lines of sight between all street users, so pedestrians, between cars and pedestrians, between cars and signage, etc. So we're continuing to work with city planning and other agencies to define on these rules to define what kind of shading and screening could be allowed and still meet those goals of visibility and of removability. And we plan to release a very visual guide book to provide very specific guidance for restaurants and the public. We want to be able to support flexibility and creativity that we've seen throughout the city, which has been really inspiring, but we also want to ensure safety. So just like the sidewalk seating, roadway seating would also be subject to sound rules and prohibitions on amplified sound and have the same hours of operation. We have all restaurants will be able to operate through the 2022 winter season. But for the permanent program, we do envision that roadway seating will be seasonal, with the long-term focus being in the warmer season, but making sure that there's some flexibility in there for winter months if there are locations that need it through a waiver process from DOT. So just to get back to the process before I hand it over to DCP, as a reminder, the pre-pandemic restaurants would apply to DCWP, or formerly DCA, for their sidewalk cafes, and they had to go through an extensive application that required engineering drawings, insurance, and licensing fees. And DCA, or now DCWP, had to review every cafe to ensure compliance. From there, the applications went to community boards and city council for public hearings, and then had to be sent to the controller's office for registration. They could also have public hearings, and the process could take 6 months or more. So in moving the legal authority to run a sidewalk program over to DOT and in creating new processes for the roadway setups, we want to streamline that review process as much as possible, learning from our experience over the past year and the opportunities that allows, while leaving in place the essential roles of agency and public review. And so some of the key process changes we're looking at include restaurants coming to one agency, not having to file engineering drawings, and being able to file online. They would still have to pay a fee, have longer licenses, but still be subject to periodic checks, and having detailed and visual instructions to ensure clear guidance, and having a robust enforcement unit with new funding to ensure that the restaurants and the public can interact and ensure compliance. So just looking kind of at the three main actions that we need to facilitate the future program. The first one, which is our focus for today, is on the zoning and the removal of those locational prohibitions to allow for more extensive and expansive application of the program. And so we are also working with City Council to enact appropriate legislation, which will move and revise the laws governing sidewalk cafes, and then create a new set of laws and rules to govern the roadway cafes. So following the zoning changes and the legal changes, we anticipate rulemaking to formalize many of the program design and application details. And then we would have a formal opening up of the application with a new application window for the new program. The timeline kind of underscores two key points. The first is that restaurants and communities should feel some certainty that we are beginning a process of developing a future program. But that the current emergency program, we are expecting at this point to be in effect for the next year and a half as we go through this process of developing the new program. And then we would also have this sort of overlapping time where there would be a transition process during the new application time, so that people can continue without disruption, to continue operating their restaurants without disruption. And then the other key point here is that updating the zoning is a first critical step to the development of this program, but there's multiple steps, and each of those steps will involve additional public input. So just in conclusion, just want to reiterate that as DOT, we're really excited about being able to make this program permanent. And I think most of us feel that COVID has really reshaped the way that we have been able to look at our streets and use our streets, and in some ways has been a silver lining of the pandemic. And so we are looking forward to moving forward with this program and this process, and we welcome all of your feedback. And I apologize on this slide, I realize that it does not have our website, it just says DOT website, but I believe the next slide we do have the web address there. So I will pass this off to DCP and we'll take questions.
Thanks, Kimberly.
Thanks.
Thank you, Kimberly. My name is Allison Brown. I'm with the Manhattan office of the Department of City Planning, and I'll be giving part 2 of this presentation, which is talking in more detail about the text amendment aspect, or item 1 that was shown in Kimberly's 3-part slide there. So Jose is going to be advancing the slides for me. Thank you so much, Jose. And at the end, we'll open it up for Q&A for both DOT, Kimberly and her team, and city planning, which will be me and my colleague, Ben Huff. Okay, so next slide, please. Oh. And I ask Jose if you could go to the next slide, or should I? Is there a way I can advance it?
Can you advance it for me? It's saying that I cannot share it because I need to bring my window to the front.
I don't, sorry, I don't see how I can advance it. Sorry. Slight technical difficulty.
Let me try that again.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yes.
Now it works?
Yes, perfect. Thank you. Okay. The proposed text amendment would remove the entirety of Chapter 1, Article 4 of the zoning resolution and related text in special districts and other areas that relate to sidewalk cafes to fully remove zoning from dictating the location of cafes. So this will allow any restaurant to apply to DOT for a sidewalk cafe if they can meet the required clear path and siting criteria irrelevant of zoning location. Next slide. Okay. So sidewalk cafes have long been a part of New York City streetscape, and with them, the laws governing cafes have evolved over the years. Up until COVID-19, zoning worked as the gatekeeper of where cafes could and could not exist. So under the zoning rules, which are currently suspended, zoning dictates 3 different kinds of cafes and where in the city they can be located. Most commonly is the unenclosed cafes, which allows for readily removable tables, chairs, and fencing with no allowable overhead coverage other than umbrellas and retractable roofs. A small sidewalk cafe is an unenclosed sidewalk cafe containing no more than a single row of tables and chairs adjacent to the street line and can extend no farther than 4 feet from the building. And finally, an enclosed cafe, which is defined as extensions of the building to the sidewalk using light building materials. And that's what we can see on the far right there. Next slide, please. So zoning held the geographic restrictions of where these cafe types were allowed. The public could view where cafes were allowed on DCP zoning and land use map, ZOLA. The yellow allows only small cafe types. Purple are areas where only unenclosed and small cafes are allowed, and green is where all cafe types are allowed. Sorry, I'm having some issues. So we can see a lot of areas where cafes are not allowed at all, even if the sidewalks were wide and conditions otherwise would have allowed it. This is the red, which is areas specifically prohibited from having cafes, and blue, which is all the residential areas of the city. Next slide. So as a response to the COVID-19 pandemic, New York State economy went on pause in March 2020. This action resulted in a ban on indoor dining that impacted the industry harshly. We saw employment in the restaurant industry drop 64% from Q1 to Q2 in 2020, with the majority of those losses in Manhattan. Sadly, the city also lost some longtime institutions in the past year as continued restrictions and aversions on indoor dining made it very difficult for dining establishments to operate. So in order to provide support for the restaurant industry and the need to move dining outdoor, New York City stood up an open restaurant program that allowed for the emergency use of sidewalks and roadways by the restaurants. This was achieved in part by suspending zoning rules that prohibited sidewalk cafes in certain areas. So over 11,500 restaurants were participating in the open restaurant program. The city saw a huge surge of outdoor dining occur in the outer boroughs. 10,000 of the restaurants used the sidewalk for their outdoor dining setup. City Hall estimates that 100,000 jobs were saved in the restaurant industry that could have been lost had the city not allowed for the move outdoors. By many accounts, open restaurants has been a lifesaver, and the program has been able to provide the twin benefit of both helping small businesses flourish while also making New York City streets and sidewalks some of the best dining options in the world. So next slide. During the emergency program, 2,500 restaurants were permitted in areas that would have been prohibited or limited under existing zoning, but the proposed text amendment will allow them. Looking at the map on the right, in red are restaurants in specific areas that are prohibited by zoning. These include commercial mid-blocks, certain special districts, under elevated rail lines, or other named congested areas. In blue are all the restaurants in residential areas. Zoning doesn't allow restaurants in residential areas, but many of these uses predate zoning and so have remained. We estimate there are about 2,900 citywide and 1,000 participating in the open restaurant program. And finally, yellow are cafes and zones that would have been limited to the small typology only of the 3 typologies we discussed previously. So in the next slide, we see the zoom into Community Board 1. So pre-COVID, Community District 1 had zoning rules that allowed all cafes in some areas shown in green, yellow, and purple. These are generally along the wider avenues and the more commercial areas. Cafes are not allowed at all in the residential areas shown in blue and along portions of 126th, 125th, 124th streets and around Duke Ellington Circle. Those are the portions shown in red on this map. Next slide, please. So under the pre-COVID sidewalk cafe process, the district actually only had 2 sidewalk cafes, which was the Lexington Pizza Parlor and the East Harlem Bottling Company, which is pictured here. And those are shown with the purple dots on the map. And then in the next slide, we can see that under the emergency open restaurants program, there are now 90 cafes operating in Community District 11. So 12 of these specifically would have been prohibited under the current zoning. You can see those again in the red and the blue dots on the map. So the text amendment would allow these cafes the opportunity to apply in a non-emergency setting to remain as a cafe, but only if they meet the siting rules that DOT lays out, such as the sidewalk width described previously. So for example, Taringa, which is located on 5th Avenue between East 109th and Duke Ellington Circle, is in a specifically prohibited location, one of those red outline locations under the existing text. But the proposed text amendment would allow for an outdoor cafe in this location, such as Taringa, to continue to operate if they apply to DOT and they can meet the sidewalk siting criteria. Next slide, please. So other cleanup actions in the text amendment include removing definitions and cross references to cafes, removing text that precludes operable windows that service outdoor restaurants, ensuring that no enclosure provisions require a restaurant to be fully indoors as a condition of its zoning district, and clarifying sidewalk widening text to ensure it does not conflict with the operation of the open restaurant program. Next slide, please. So to summarize, we are at the start of a multi-pronged legislative process. The text that is being referred out today will be referred to all 59 community boards and 5 borough presidents for 90 days. And we expect the text to come back to the City Planning Commission this fall. We anticipate the City Council actions will be underway during the same period, continuing the process of updating the sidewalk cafe program and fully fleshing out the roadway cafe authority through a DOT rulemaking process. Also underway during the summer and informed in part by community board consultations will be a DOT design review process the city planning will be involved with. We do not expect full program launch until late 2022. or early 2023 at the earliest, which gives a lot of time for restaurants to transition to the permanent program should they choose to do so. And next slide, please, is our last slide, just questions. So again, I'm joined by my colleague Ben Huff, and also would welcome back the rest of the DOT team for any questions about either presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. There was a lot there, I think.
It's a lot to process, yes.
It's a lot to process, and there's a lot. I will say that I personally am grateful to the city for the way they pivoted during COVID and were able to save a lot of the restaurants. You know, that was greatly appreciated, and I think necessary in the time that we were in. There is a lot that comes to mind when I'm thinking about especially the roadway cafes, you know, with parking and traffic and crossing the street and, you know, double parking. It's just a lot. There's a lot of congestion, and it also creates some congestion with the cafes in terms of pedestrian congestion. So there is a lot of concern when I see something going to full scale like this and permanently. Makes, you know, me personally take a look at all of those things. I had a few questions, but I wanted to also, I know that we have a lot of questions from the board, so I might get back to mine. But one of the questions that I did have was in terms of signage and knowing if a sidewalk cafe or a roadway cafe was legally situated. So I know that you mentioned there were maybe 2 sidewalk cafes prior to COVID. I feel like there were more actually operating as such. So but as a pedestrian, I don't know which one is and which one hasn't gone through the process. I don't know if there's any signage that is accompanied with this. And then also about regulation. I mean, there's a bunch of actual questions, but I'll let you answer that, and then I'm gonna get to the hands in the thing.
Okay, hi Elsie, this is Ben Huff from City Planning. I think I'll try to answer that first question. So prior to COVID, restaurants had to apply to DCWP, Department of Consumer and Workforce Protection, previously known as the Department of Consumer Affairs, to get a license to operate a sidewalk cafe. And they had to have the appropriate zoning. So that map that Allison showed before showed the pre-existing regulations. As far as our records indicate, there were only 2 cafes who had participated in that to have the sidewalk cafe, and they would have had to pay a fee. The future program will act in a similar manner. So all the restaurants that are in the emergency program will have to apply and be accepted into DOT's program. But DOT, you know, part of why we're removing this from zoning, we're making it where any restaurant is eligible as long as they meet the sidewalk conditions, and then they will go to DOT to apply for either a roadway or a sidewalk cafe.
But in terms of me as a pedestrian walking by and seeing a restaurant cafe, I wouldn't be able to tell if it had went through that process just by any signage, by saying like this isn't a DOT.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
You know what I'm saying?
There was a permit that restaurants had to display in their window that showed that they had a legal sidewalk cafe. Okay. And I imagine that process will continue in the permanent program. It's not happening in the emergency program.
So restaurants are given a permit to print that says they're eligible for after they self-certify, but some are putting it out, some are not, and that's just in the emergency program. In the permanent program, there will be, as Ben said, better signage that tells you if they've actually been approved.
Okay, I also have a whole bunch of questions about the other stuff, but I'm gonna get to the hands first. So Jason, then Ivy, and I think George had his hands up as well.
I have one question for the DOT. In your presentation, I didn't see anything about lighting. There's a major concern with the community board and you know, just the public lighting. If you ever drive down Park Avenue between 125th and 116, you get an idea. And that just sparks the thought of our concerns with these roadblock restaurants that, you know, they shut down at night, and it just even desolates the area further at times. And what is your plan to not only address the excitement for this new operation, but more importantly, to address the concerns of existing operations with maintenance like lighting in our district?
So I think I can start, and if others want to jump in, you know, the existing program, we've required restaurants to have reflective tape around their barriers, which helps for cars to see them as they're coming by, and have tried to put out, you know, some clear guidance throughout the program. However, in the permanent program, as Kim alluded to, and as we've talked about throughout tonight's presentation, there will be really clear guidance on what is required from these restaurants, and much more enforcement than there's been over the emergency program. You know, we stood up this program very quickly, really to give restaurants the opportunity to come back and, you know, be able to survive during the pandemic. But during the permanent program, enforcement and making sure that the setups are very safe, and meet the criteria that we need, but also you know, are safe for the neighborhood.
Ivy, George, and then Angel.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for the presentation. I just have a very quick question. What are you doing about rodents? How do the, yeah, that's it.
Can try to jump in on this one, Julie. So we actually have gotten some feedback directly, both from sanitation and the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, with a bunch of suggestions of additional requirements that we can tack on to currently existing to ensure that restaurants are doing their part to prevent debris accumulation, which of course attracts rodents. So we are working through that now. It is a deviation from our existing requirements that we kind of demand of our participants now. And so we do need to balance that a little bit, both, you know, preserving quality of life with the additional burden that we do put on the participants who are very much in recovery mode. So, but we are definitely very seriously planning to implement a lot of those rules for the permanent program. It would include, you know, space both in front of their establishment and maybe a little bit farther out, but we're still working that out.
I think it's a really big problem, and personally, I'm not really satisfied with that answer. I think that we need really concrete regulations for how to deal with rodents. There should be a technical specification required for restaurants as far as the receptacles that they're using. It is absolutely disgusting how many rats are running around the city these days. I don't know if other people agree with me, but I find particularly on my street, where there is an open street restaurant on the corner, it is like Ratville. I literally do not walk there at night because you see hordes of rats, like hordes. And it's disgusting. And I think that if we're not seriously requiring restaurants to have receptacles that are sealed tightly and easy to clean, then we are not addressing the problem. And I think we need to see technical specifications that whether I understand the motivation to ease the burden on small businesses, fine, then this is something the city should be supplementing as far as allowing them some, I don't know, some tax benefit or whatever needs to be done to get these receptacles to be properly designed and maintained needs to happen. It's a really seriously disgusting problem in the city today.
Yeah, so I'm not intimately familiar with whatever standards are already required of
probably none, and I think that's part of the problem.
Yeah, what I'm saying is I imagine there are to operate a restaurant in New York City. I'm sure there are rules governing around how they dispose of their trash. And so we would just need to make sure that those rules comport with the future program. And also that that establishment is even following the existing rules. So I think we would just need to know a little bit more about the existing restaurants, and particularly the one that you're familiar with, and whether or not they're even following existing rules.
I guess I just want to say one more thing on this, and I know it's annoying that I keep talking back, but I found with all these presentations tonight, like we're trying to give you guys feedback, and I feel like the response from zoning is a defensive one, and I don't think, personally, I don't really appreciate that. It's if there is a problem with rats, it probably also has to do with the fact that the existing pre-COVID rat requirements or rodent receptacle requirements, whatever you want to say, whatever was already in place was already broken. And so to then come in and say, we're going to change the zoning and allow these sweeping changes, and to say, oh, before we require anything else in the way of receptacles and rodent prevention, we're just going to check on what was already in place. The point is, what was there was bad, what is now is bad, and what we want is something better. So it would be really great to feel like we could make a comment to any one of these presentations and to have a response that was something like, that's a great comment, Ivy and Community Board 11. We're gonna think about how to address the trash problem, and we're gonna do whatever we can to improve it, regardless of what the standards might have been in 2019, because let's all get real, it was nasty then too. So thank you.
Thank you, Ivy. George? You're muted, George.
Okay, I have a comment and I have questions, and Elsie, you'll shut me down when you need to shut me down, all right?
I will.
Okay, just a comment first. We're deleting an entire section or chapter of the zoning resolution, which seems kind of radical to me on one hand, but on the other hand, I think zoning just generally doesn't affect activities that happen in streets and sidewalks with very limited limitations. So maybe this actually kind of makes sense to put it in DOT's hands, who controls the sidewalk. So I see it as a big thing, but maybe it could make some sense. But I have some specific questions, specifically like, so it's a public asset. Are we going to be? Is the city going to be charging money, like a lease, or is it just the fee for the application?
So this is something that we're still coming to terms with and still deciding on with City Hall. It is something that we would like to charge for, but also keeping in mind that we really do want this program to be accommodating to all restaurants. And so if there is a fee, the fee would be a smaller fee that all restaurants could participate in this program.
And the question for folks on the board, I think, is to think about, this is a public asset, right? And restaurants are private organizations for profit, and using this public asset like this, and how, is it okay if you have a fee, and how that fee would be priced? It's something for y'all, I think, to consider. There's a very long transition period from the emergency program we have now till when the permanent program is in place. So what is the process for the transition from the temporary program? Like the structures, like we have like buildings in the street, right? So, and which may not meet the program. So like, what is the process for migrating from, a structure that somebody spent a lot of money on to something that would actually meet whatever design requirements you come up with, assuming that you haven't come up with them yet?
Yeah, we have not come up with them yet. We're in the process of coming up with them, thinking about, what really goes into a permanent program. And obviously in this temporary program, they had to dine outside in the winter, and that's very different than when indoor dining is allowed again. And while this may still, restaurants may still want to keep their setups in the winter, it will look very different than how it looked in COVID. So the idea is we will come up with these guidelines over the next year, and give restaurants a lot of time to change their setups. And there will be, we've been very, very kind to restaurants in our inspections and enforcement. And, that will change a bit during the permanent process, as we will have to enforce much more than we have and make sure that everyone is in compliance, and really following the rules.
Okay. So is there an opportunity for public comment on specific, there's like, if we were going to change the zoning resolution to add a section of the street to allow for sidewalk cafes, they would come to the community board. The community board would have an opportunity to comment. I guess in this part, what is, after the rules are in place, is there any opportunity for future comment? I've heard this idea of revocable consent. Is that something that ever comes to the public for comment?
Yeah, so revocable consent does go to, so first the sidewalk cafes, and Ben can talk a little bit about this, will still go to the community boards.
Okay.
The roadway and sidewalk will both go through revocable consents, which go through hearings, and those have to get passed. So there is some community input.
Can you talk a little bit about revocable consent for the board? Like, what is that, and when does it apply?
I was gonna ask, George. I was just gonna ask.
I could take that, Julie.
Yeah, if you want to start, and I'll jump in.
Sure. Yeah. So revocable consent is sort of the contract that a business has with the city to use the public space or build anything on or below city property. So both the sidewalk and the roadway cafe program will be subject to revocable consent. And that is where the fee is sort of the transaction that like solidifies the contract between the city and the business. We haven't determined what the fee is, as Julie mentioned, but there will be something, to kind of solidify that revocable consent.
Okay. Okay, I'll keep going if I can.
I'm gonna let Angel ask questions, and then we'll do another circle around.
Okay.
Go ahead, George. I'm good. Thank you, though.
Wait, quick question. Julie, you're from DOT or DCP? I'm sorry.
I'm from, Judy and I are both from DOT, and Ben is from DCP.
Thank you.
Okay, so imagine there's like you have one of these go up, there's a conflict. There's a real conflict where, there's an elementary school, a subway stop, you have all kinds of traffic that wasn't considered on the sidewalk. Maybe you have a lot of people who are in wheelchairs or in walkers in this area, and there is a persistent congestion problem on the sidewalk that is created by a sidewalk cafe. Is there anything that can be done about that?
I mean, the city has full right to remove if there's a real reason that we would have to. Under the revocable consent, there is insurance required and indemnification required. And so and the city has the right to do that if we do need to. And one of the things that we've put in, that we're planning to put in this program, especially for the roadway, is having the setups be removable and somewhat temporary for when road work has to be done, or street sweeping, or not street sweeping like every week, but if it's snow and all of this, there's like things that happen on the street that where a cafe would not be able to set up. And I think similarly on the sidewalk, if we see that it's just really not working, there's always the option of taking it out. However, that's not, it wouldn't be our first choice.
Okay.
I would just add that sidewalk cafes also will have to meet the clear path requirement. Since it's been self-certify, the emergency program, and we have not had as robust of an enforcement program we have been enforcing, but it hasn't been as quickly. You know, we imagine the permanent program will, you know, they will have these clear path.
But,
you know,
but
they'll
if
be
you
able to
actually
meet that.
go back to that clear path map that you had up there, because I mean, you have two categories, it looks like. And ultimately, I think when you get into the fine grained neighborhood level detail, you'll find that those would be fine in most cases, but there may be a block or two where you actually need a wider area because of a specific use, right? Or a subway entrance or something like that, where you know, something attracts trips, right? You know, that generates an enormous amount of trips because of a school or a subway. And so you might want something that's more fine-grained at the neighborhood level.
I think that's a really great point, and that's the type of feedback we're looking for in the community board, you know, public review process.
Great. Is it possible to share Community Board 11311 complaints on the temporary open restaurant program? Like, you know, we understand from, you know, living in the city that it's worked at some level, but, you know, have there been a lot of complaints? Are there specific neighborhoods where there have been complaints, specific establishments? And have those complaints changed? Like, you know, were there a lot of noise complaints in 2020 compared to 2019?
I think we can look into that, but obviously we don't have that information right now.
Right. I think it would be, sorry.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, we did look at some 311 data. I will just say there wasn't a lot of sidewalk cafes or open restaurants, especially in this neighborhood. So it's difficult to compare apples to apples. We also created some new 311 sort of 311 types during the emergency open restaurants program. So it's very, you know, entirely new complaints that people were able to make during the emergency program. And we, you know, you'd have to think a lot about also sort of how the ban on indoor dining evolved over time. You know, there was a complete ban on indoor dining and a lot of people doing things outdoors. And now we're seeing more and more shift back indoors. And as far as noise complaints, the permanent program, as with the previous program, there's no amplified noise allowed in outdoor cafes.
Last question, if I may, would be, you're here because of a zoning change. And it's very clear that you are making a lot of rules after this, meaning how are these things going to be set up and the establishment of fees and all of this, inspections. Are you going to be coming back after this when you have draft administrative rules? Will that be coming back for the community board to hear?
Julie, I think that speaks to the next steps of DOT's process.
Yeah, I think we can certainly brief the community boards after, but what probably will not be in, and we're still figuring out the outreach process post this, but yes, we can certainly, if you have specific questions on the rule process and all of that, we can definitely come back and brief you on where we're at.
George, you done?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Angel, I'm circling back to you really quickly to check to see if George didn't ask every single question you wanted to ask.
No. Minor more comments. So that last response to George's last question is very much evidence of the basis of my concern with this. This is a trust me kind of proposal. And for those of us that are very experienced dealing with the city, that's never a good deal to make. This should have been fully fleshed out before it was presented to community boards, to be perfectly frank. While I do appreciate that the city bend over backwards and turns itself inside out to help the small business impacted by the pandemic, we're coming out of that, whether it's today, tomorrow, or the day after. And like you just said, you know, restaurants are going to be, you know, accepting more and more people inside, and the need for, you know, outside dining is going to be lessened to that degree. Still, I think it's a good idea that the current sidewalk cafe regulations, which I think are arbitrary and have been subject to entirely too much politics, that have prevented businesses that could have benefited from a sidewalk cafe from participating in that program, correcting that mistake, I think, is a great thing. Offering an opportunity for so many more businesses to be able to extend their operating space and thus help themselves, I think is fantastic. Help commercial areas become more vibrant, I think is fantastic too. For us, the 125th Street, 116th Street come to mind, that are very wide avenues that can certainly benefit from having more commercial activity and more pedestrian activity, constructive pedestrian activity. What I do not appreciate is this overreach of extending the roadway program when that is not needed anymore, or will soon not be needed anymore. And to say that that's going to be permanent past the term of this administration, I think is frankly arrogant. No one asked, or few people, or only a specific industry is asking for that. But the impact of whatever decisions we make as it relates to policy are not just for a specific industry. There are impacts on others as well, those that live around it, those that frequent those streets, those that frankly require that free parking. I know that there is, and there has been, a big move to, taking a loss on parking for other benefits, and I applaud many of those. But frankly, once you sum all of them up, you end up really taking a lot of opportunities from people that depend on that free parking. So no matter what your planning books say, or no matter what the current transportation trends are, the fact is that people need that. And if you keep taking it away, where are they supposed to go? They can't afford private parking lots. But it keeps being taken away without dialogue with them. And to say that you're going to make the rules after the fact is very concerning. And as it relates to DOT, I'll tell you all frankly, has been very poor at communicating and being responsive with this district. So to say that we have to trust you is not something that I, as district manager of this community board, will advise this board to do. Tell us exactly what it is that you're asking us to support you on, and we'll consider that. But do not ask us to support something that you're going to fill in the blanks for later. I think that's a poor ask of this community board, or any community board, to be frank. Taking valuable roadway in this community district when already we have lost spaces, we contributed spaces, if you want to reword it, to roadway, to street redesign, to benefit the select bus service, to benefit the car share, to benefit, all kinds of extended stations and bus, and sidewalk extensions and the like. You keep adding those up, eventually they're a loss, and not the benefit that they were originally intended to be. And I'm afraid that this is what's going to result what's going to result from this program is just that, is you're going to continue to cost a community that needs it, just to say that, oh, Mayor de Blasio is, keeping true to his promise. Well, nobody asked him for his promise. To be frank, his term is over in December, and so be it. And whatever he's done well should end there, or we continue to reap benefits. But to say that he's going to make permanent a program that is going to have long-lasting impacts on communities, I think is a real problem. And to codify that by changing the zoning text, and to then further say, oh, we're going to trust the Department of Transportation to enforce. DOT doesn't do any enforcement, and if you do it, you don't do it in my district. That's just the plain, honest truth. Okay, you do not. You don't do any enforcement. I have pedestrian roadways right now that are blocked all the time, and nobody comes and does anything about them. And no matter how many times you call, you don't do it. Okay, and that impacts people. So you're going to have people pushing carriages into the street. More of that. People on wheelchairs going into the street. You're going to have more of that because you do not do enforcement. That's the plain, honest truth. And I'm not here to attack DOT. Anyone that's known me at the community board knows that I've been a champion of DOT for many years. But the fact of the matter is that lately, I can't champion you. And I certainly can't champion this or trust you to create rules after the fact without consultation, meaningful conversation with communities that are going to be impacted. That's just a bad deal.
Thank you for that, Angel. I see two more hands, and I echo a lot of what you say, Angel, as well. I think Jessica was first, and then Ivy.
It's a tough act to follow, Angel. It's not an act, I know. The passion for parking, to channel that into the work on residential parking permits is maybe something that we can do. But I want to bring up some of the same points. I know this has been exciting for everyone in agency land at DOT, not just exciting, but also a lot of work. And the fact that you were able to mobilize, where did you find the time? I think this is to Angel's point about enforcement and curb management and what happens after. Is this really the purview of DOT? Does it belong in some other point of oversight that can make sure that the concerns that Angel has expressed get answered in places where you have really sensitive, vulnerable populations, sharing sidewalks that are congested. It happens all over the city, I understand. So I guess the question is a little bit of a speculation, how this kind of frame of a director of public space, questions about rats, some of the challenges that you've not been able to answer are outside of what you do really well. And so how do you, where do you kind of give up? Where do you sort of, where do you give up the right to kind of, to sort of be in charge of these things that you can't manage all the way through? So I guess my question is, does this, and this is to George's point of really congested corners or areas that may pop up, does it open the door to DOT to come and be responsive to offering things like bulb outs or micro plazas or things that aren't yet in your toolkit that may benefit pedestrians, people who use the sidewalk, people who need to be able to access the curbside, not just, you know, deliveries, where that space becomes sort of less and less as far as what's available. I think East Harlem is you know, everybody looks out for one another, but the important thing of having agencies respond to our needs and asks in a nimble and participatory way is not something that there has been so much response on. So this is great and it's citywide. It has a lot of challenges. You're trying to address them in real time. I understand how much work that is, but the sort of the qualms and the challenges are the realities of kind of who fixes the things that don't work, and you know how do you build that trust to make sure that there will be a way to fix the things that don't work. Consolidated waste is outside of your jurisdiction, but it's something that if there are 4 restaurants on one block, then there should be a consolidated waste facility on the block as well to manage some of the challenges that Ivy brought up with rats. So those things have to move as fast as what you're doing here in order for the quality of life challenges and the public safety challenges that come along with it to really not become adverse effects to something that is intended to be good. So I think there's no question there other than, do you really think this is your purview? Beyond now.
Wait, did you just think of a question there? I'm sorry.
I did, Elsie, it was rhetorical.
Okay, all right, it was, okay, I just wanted to make
public space management is my question.
Got it. And Ivy, question or comment?
I guess it's a comment.
All right, 'cause I want to get us.
Okay, that's fine. I was basically just gonna say that I think, the parking is a serious problem. So I would just want to echo what Angel's saying, and whichever authority has jurisdiction, DOT or planning, we really need more public parking facilities here. It is, anyway, period.
Yes, no, I agree. And I think, Angel really summarized a lot of what I think the sentiment is in most of our committee, but also in our community. I'm not a driver. I do not require parking, but it is impossible to even find it when you are with someone who is driving. It is impossible to find it where there are a lot of restaurants who now have this roadway cafe. I mean, we drove around. It had to be half an hour just to find one spot, and it was. To be honest, I'm not even sure it was a spot. So with that being said, and with the conversation around lighting, around rodents, George brought up a really good point about it being a public asset, and what exactly is the structure around payment there, what exactly is the structure around fees. These are for-profit entities, and this is our streets are our public asset, and so all of those things are really things that I want our committee to really digest and think about. We will have to be voting on this, and I think that these are all important topics that we have to really dig into, and really we're going to have to come up with a response and a vote. And so just to keep those things in our mind. And again, like I said, I do appreciate the pivot, and I do appreciate what it has brought to us in the time of need. Moving forward and permanently is a different story. And so we will be looking at that as a committee. So the committee should all be looking at all of those great points, because there really were many. With that, I think that was the last presentation, but I know that there was an opportunity for our committee if you had questions about the hotels. And so I don't know, I'm hoping that most of you had a chance to look over it and read it. So if you do have any questions, I would allow some space for that now. And hopefully we can try to get some answers for that. But if not, you can just let me know. If not, oh, wait, I see a hand. Where is this?
Beverly Pabon, she's a board member.
Okay, Beverly, I'm sorry, I couldn't see your full name there.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Great presentation. I ditto to what Angel has spoke about, and my concerns also, and ditto for what Ivy's concerns are regarding rats. There has been a real influx of rodents in the area. My question and concern is for the roadway cafes, the platforms. I don't know if DOT or whoever would be in charge of the constructions of these platforms, because seeing that they will have a space between the roadway and it being ADA compliance. So that opens up a haven for nesting for rodents. And I wouldn't know how I would be concerned on how would the cafes be, monitor this, because whatever space that you put, rats and rodents can easily hide up under those things. And if they're there permanently, you just gave them a new home on the outside to get closer to the food source that might be coming from it. So I want to know, how would the construction be part of this text amendment regarding roadway cafes? My other question was in regards to sanitation. I know when people own buildings, they are responsible for at least 18 inches away from the curb for clean sidewalks, or they'll get ticketed. If you permanently put these cafes, especially roadway cafes or cafes in general, in the mix, who gets ticketed? Do the homeowners of the buildings get ticketed? Because most of the restaurant facilities don't own the building. You know, they're usually leasing out the space. So I'm concerned about homeowners being ticketed for garbage or whatever that comes from these establishments. Thank you.
I think on your first point, we're certainly going, one of the things that we're including in our requirements is that the structures are ADA accessible. And the point about rodents is something that we can bring back to sanitation and your other point with sanitation as well, and make sure that those are included in our rules.
Thank you.
Okay, with that all being said, I'm going to just ask one more time about hotels and then we can move forward. Jason, quickly.
No, Madam Chair, I was waiting for the next topic. I thought we were closing the open restaurants.
We're
Okay.
closing it. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to get a sense of the discussion.
Of the what? I'm sorry.
Like, we're taking a position on the hotels today?
No, not today. Right? Angel, I don't believe it's today.
I'll see. This is
Next meeting.
Yes.
from DCP. Yeah, I mean, just thank you everyone for your time. I just wanted to add, like, quickly, you know, couple of notes. The clock for the hotel's special permit will expire on July 12th. The PCEs and the health and fitness tax amendment on the 27th, as well. The same clock with fresh too. They expired on the 27th, and the open restaurants has a little bit of larger time, will be expiring in September 27th. So there is more time for you guys to deliberate and discuss. You know, the most upcoming one would be the special permit. So if you do have any more questions or anything you guys would like to discuss, feel free to share with me in advance, and I can try to respond to that. The other thing that I wanted to add to the point, I think, I mean, is something that we definitely feel, you know, we need to do a lot better on top of our reach and collaboration with the community boards. What we're going to be, you know, taking on today, or what the community board will be deliberating for the text is actual, the text amendment. It will be the removal of the actual current existing regulations that make it so hard for restaurants to have a sidewalk cafe or a walkway program. But like, we don't have those details yet, because that's not part of the zoning thing. Like, I didn't want it to get confused between what is being proposed to the community board and what the actual different urban characteristics, so like requirements and regulations, will be once the program is established. I think that, as DOT has mentioned, they will be coming back once they are, you know, those things get more fleshed out. In our previous discussion, they were still having to, you know, planning out how the community outreach will be for informing the program. So the program hasn't been finalized yet. So I think there will be opportunity for you guys to collaborate and be involved in this process. But that's the last point I wanted to make. And if there are any other questions, just let me know.
I answered a question in the chat. I just wanted to make sure. You said July 12th for the special permit on hotels.
Yes,
correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. Jason?
I'm sorry.
Oh, no problem. Okay. So with that, we have our homework, I guess you can call it that. We can look up, ask any more questions. If one comes to mind, or have any more comments, please send that in to either myself or to Angel. And then I believe we can do our final roll call at this time, Angel.
Sure. Before I do that, there was a question in the chat that I responded to, but for anyone else that didn't get to see it, we will be accepting testimony on all of the proposals to the general inbox, mn11@cb.nyc.gov. The sooner the better, but that's what you send it to. Or if you have any questions, you can always contact the office at 212-831-8929. Okay, now for attendance. Jessica Elliott.
Present.
Elsie Encarnacion.
Present.
Ivy Hume.
Present.
Francis Mastroda.
Present.
Jessica Morris. Andrew Padilla.
I'm here, Angel, sorry.
That's okay, thanks. Vinny Torres. Jason Villanueva.
Presente.
And Candy Vives Vasquez. You have quorum.
course. I have a great group here. Thank you so much, guys, for your input and your time. I hope everybody voted today, and I will see you at our next meeting.
Can I make a quick announcement?
Oh.
I want to take a moment of silence for the Brooklyn Nets that lost.
Good night, y'all. Good